So let's have a look at what can go wrong when you start implementing functions, because beginners often have difficulties with implementing them for the first time. You can get things like syntax errors where the program doesn't run, or runtime errors where the program starts running but crashes halfway through, or bugs, which are more general things where the code doesn't run as expected or gives the wrong output, that kind of thing. Or anomalies where the code works fine but it doesn't make sense, slightly different to a bug. Let's look at all of those things in turn and see where they can arise. So simple syntax errors include forgetting the def keyword. So remember, syntax is when you're in idle perhaps, you try and run it, and idle just won't run anything. If you forget the def keyword, that'll certainly throw up a syntax error. If you forget the round brackets in the function definition, that will also throw one. Forget the colon, same again. If you don't indent the body of the function, all of those things will prevent the program from running at all. But idle will tell you that when you try and run the program. And in fact, when we get on to using PyCharm, it'll tell you that before you even try to run it. So hopefully that'll get picked up by the IDE, the Integrated Development Environment, which is idle or PyCharm. We're now going to look at some things that can go wrong actually when you're running it. So the first thing is, this is nothing wrong. This is just to show you that actually the names in the code that you use to invoke the function don't have to match those in the function. So you'll see here this version of calculate where I've got three completely meaningless names that are the parameters, okay, and they don't match at all the things that I'm passing in. This code will work fine. There won't be any problems with that because it's just the same as before. The trouble is, if I try and read this, it's really hard to understand. I can't understand what this function does because I can't really, tray and flip-flop don't really make much sense. So, which is a good reason for, naming your variables meaningfully. But when you have them, this is just to point out that when you have them in a function, they are different things. They can be called something completely different. They don't have to match. And in this case, number is actually what we pass in as number one, then gets stored in a variable called fish, and what's passed in as number two, stored in a variable called cornflake, and the operation is stored in a variable called tray. So the rest of that code actually makes perfect sense. Okay. So it's not a bug or an error, but it makes the code hard to read. So just be aware of that. And just to take that a bit further, this is where errors can occur as far as beginners are concerned in particular. The variables used inside that function are completely different variables to the variables used in the invoking code. So when I pass information into the function, the information is stored in a different place to the code where I was invoking that function from, meaning that I've just got a copy of that information. And that's why you can't get a function to change a variable you pass in. If I pass in a value and get the function to change that, actually that's stored in a completely different location. So when I try and access it again in my invoking code, I don't get the changed version, I get the original version. Because the thing that the function changes is a copy of that variable. So to demonstrate that, let me show you this example. So suppose I set combination to 0 up here. Then I calculate number one, number two operation, and I pass in the combination because I want the function to do to change store the result in this variable combination. If I do that, calculate, here's my calculate function. It hasn't got the tray and flip-flop anymore. It's now got number one, number two operation, and so on. But the combination it saves is a completely different variable to the one up in the the code that's passed in. So it's not passing back the value that's been calculated here. So when I come to run this, if I run this, I'll just get 0, because although I have changed it, I'm not really passing that information back. It's just I'm not passing them back. So the calculate function isn't set, or there is no variable set equal to calculate the function like we did before, and so anything that's calculated inside that function is just ignored. I always get 0 regardless of what I put in. That's quite a hard one to understand, but just be aware that you can't get functions to really change the information they're passing in unless you pass it back. The remaining examples are much simpler, actually. That they're just, if you get a mismatch of parameters and arguments, you'll get a runtime error. Usually the program will run, but it will crash halfway through. So here's another example. Okay, if I try and run this code, if I've declared 2 parameters, so number 1 and operation, the function actually needs 3 of them. It needs number 2 as well. So number 2 is not defined. It hasn't been passed into the function, and the function will crash when it tries to do that, either of these calculations. Okay. Here's another problem. Again, this is a mismatch now of what's passed in and what's being used. So I'm passing in on this line 4 variables, number 1, number 2, number 3, and operation. The function's only expecting 3 of them. Number 1, number 2, and operation. You will get an error because number 3 is now the operation. So there's no matching for this operation parameter. It'll run, but it'll crash when trying to do the calculation again. Okay, or if we do it the other way around, suppose the function's expecting 3 values, number 1, number 2, and operation, but we only pass in 2. Again, as you'd expect, you'll get an error. Okay, there's no matching argument for that parameter. So they have to match, although I'll tell you shortly about the way you can get around that. And the program will run, but will crash when doing the calculation.